This has been a very scary week for secular activists like myself. And I say that as if there isn't some kind of religious crisis in this country every couple years. Ever since the 1962 case of Engel v. Vitali that determined that school-led public prayer was unconstitutional, religion has been trying to squirm its way back into the school system. The 1971 case Lemon v. Kurtzman gave us the Lemon test. This was a three-pronged approach to help determine if a certain statute was breaking the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. For those that don't know, the First Amendment, the thing that gives us freedoms like the freedom of speech and the freedom of religion, says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Then it goes on to list all the other freedoms we used to enjoy in this country. The very first part of what I just gave you is called the Establishment Clause. In fact, it was so important for the Founding Fathers that they made it the very first part of the very first amendment. The Lemon v. Kurtzman case was about a law that required the state to pay for at least some religious private school assets, stuff like textbooks. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my tax dollars going to pay for someone's overtly religious education. Here's the conclusion from the OEA website. The court held that a statute must pass a three-pronged test in order to avoid violating the Establishment Clause. The statute must have a secular legislative purpose. Its principal or primary effect must be one that neither promotes nor inhibits religion, and it must not foster excessive government entanglement with religion. And this case became a benchmark for other cases like it, including one of the most famous ones in 2005, the Kitzmiller v. Dover trial, that very rightly concluded that intelligent design is not science. It is a religious doctrine wearing sheep's clothing. It is pretending to be science, but it is very much not science. But the landmark case that begins this particular story is actually from 1980 in Stone v. Graham. There was a Kentucky law passed that made it necessary for public schools to have a display of the Ten Commandments. Now, this is obviously a violation of the Establishment Clause. In the same year as Kitzmiller v. Dover, so in 2005, we also see the Van Orden v. Perry case. Bit of a background to this. When the movie The Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston came out, him and a ragtag group of good old boys decided to have a promotional tour. And during this promotional tour, they would establish monuments of the Ten Commandments around the states. And one of the places that they erected a monument of the Ten Commandments was in the Texas Capitol building. The thing is, since this case was brought 50 years after the actual erection of the monument, it was deemed historical, so they didn't get rid of it. They didn't see it as violating the Establishment Clause. It had now been there for 50 years, and the movie was so popular and had been referenced in so many other forms of media that it was now historical to have this reference to it at the Texas State Capitol. Ever since then, a variety of states, most recently Louisiana, passed Ten Commandments bills in which the Ten Commandments should be displayed in public schools. Now see, in Louisiana, this was quickly shut down by the courts, but the story is a bit more complicated in the subject of today's video, that being the Texas Ten Commandments bill. And while the legalese of this bill is slightly different than that of Louisiana, I promise you that it makes the story a lot funnier. So Texas has been trying to pass their brand new Ten Commandments bill. And this bill, if passed, would basically require the Ten Commandments be displayed in public schools. And I say basically for a reason. It does get a little bit murky. The bill itself, which I'll leave a link to below, says that the school needs to accept any private donation of the Ten Commandments and may purchase them. So if a teacher or administration purchases a copy of the Ten Commandments, then they will be allowed to display them. But if the school doesn't do it, a private donator can donate to them a copy of the Ten Commandments, and then they will be required to display them. And you can see just by the language and construction of this bill how they're trying to get around that pesky case in 1980 of Stone v. Graham. If they had mandated that every single public school classroom needs to have a copy of the Ten Commandments in it, it would be a violation of the Establishment Clause. But with some simple wordplay, they would basically just make it okay to display them. But then it goes on to say, obviously, that if the Ten Commandments copy that they have is privately donated, then they must put it up. So even if the administrations see the glaring problem in violating the Establishment Clause in public schools, some well-meaning but oblivious Christian family can just donate a copy, and then they're going to be required to display the Ten Commandments. Now, I was initially going to make this video about the original context of the Ten Commandments. I was going to talk about their textual history, their historical importance, the history of interpretation, and how that would be wholly inappropriate to have the Ten Commandments. Also, if you don't know, the Ten Commandments are otherwise known as the Decalogue, or 10 words. So when I refer to that in this video, you'll know. But I was initially going to make it about the original setting for these laws. But as I looked deeper and deeper into the bill, and especially some of the amendments passed, I had to change gears, because there is a story you need to hear that not a single other person on this platform is talking about. I seem to be the only one that has actually noticed this about the bill. So I am very excited to bring you some of these updates, because oh boy, are they funny. So I'm still going to talk about the historical setting, at least a little bit, and what they meant in context, but it's going to have to be entirely secondary to the main plot of this video. And before I give you this story, there is a bit of a caveat to this. That being that the actual website that tracks which amendments passed or failed or what was voted on isn't super clear about which ones passed and failed. It does give you a finalized version of the bill, the one that is currently being looked at. However, something just doesn't quite match up with how many amendments there were and how many actual amendments passed and how many of them failed. Something's not quite matching up, so I'm not entirely sure what the final form of the bill will be. So everything that I'm going to tell you is my reconstruction of how things went down in the House, the Texas House, and the Texas Senate, because there are so many twists and turns to this. But essentially, I'm going to be giving you my headcanon version of what happened, because unfortunately, I can't make heads or tails of the timeline. But maybe someone who actually understands how this stuff works can unpack that at some later date. But this is just as much as I could pull out from that is horrible wording. Why did I say that? This is as much as I can garner, better word, from the available evidence that I have and understand. So the Senate introduced a bill saying that the Ten Commandments may be displayed in public schools and shall be displayed in public schools if they are purchased by the school or a teacher or are privately donated. Firstly, the text of the Ten Commandments that is given on the bill reflects a strictly Protestant view of the Ten Commandments, strictly the Protestant numbering of them, because not all traditions agree on what the proper numbering is. So aside from the glaring constitutional problem we have, there's also the problem of theology, because what are you going to do about the Catholic or Jewish interpretation, or at least their numbering, because they are different? Here is actually a chart from Jack Lundbom's commentary on Deuteronomy. You can see that the Catholic, Protestant, and Jewish versions actually disagree on the numbering, and with the Protestant version, and they don't even agree with each other. So we already have different numbering systems for the 10 Commandments. Which one are the 10 Commandments? Where do they start and where do they stop? Another problem is which set of 10 Commandments to use. Many people don't know this, but there are actually 3 different versions of the 10 Commandments within the Bible. There's, of course, the first one in Exodus 20, when Moses goes up the mountain. He's talking directly to God, and God gives him the 10 Commandments. And that's, of course, the one that the Texas 10 Commandments bill has taken up. There is a very similar version to it in Deuteronomy 5, and then there's the completely different one in Exodus 34. Because remember, in Exodus, when Moses comes down from the mountain, he sees them worshiping the calf, and he clumsily drops the set of 10 commandments that God just gave him, that silly Billy. So he is given a new set of 10 commandments called the Ritual Decalogue that is entirely different. It shares almost nothing in common with the first set of commandments, which is weird for a number of reasons. It includes things like keeping the Passover, not offering the blood of a sacrifice with leaven, and who could forget not boiling a young goat in its mother's milk. How sweet. Unfortunately, none of those made it into the Texas 10 Commandments bill. Even weirder is that the biblical text actually implies that the second set of commandments that Moses receives is the exact same text as the first set of commandments. Because in Deuteronomy 10:2 and 10:4, we are told that Moses wrote on the new tablets the same words that were on the previous tablets. So which one is it? Are they an entirely different set of 10 commandments, or are they exactly the same? Pick a lane. Now, see, I don't have time in this specific video to answer the question of why there are 3 different sets of commandments. I happen to agree with John Van Setter's model that he presents in his book, A Law Book for the Diaspora. So if you want an actual argument for the textual history of this, I would recommend reading that. But since the Texas 10 Commandments bill was initially proposed with a redacted and Americanized version of the 10 Commandments, one of the amendments actually proposed that they include the whole thing. The actual 10 Commandments in full, not just the short one-liners that you get in a whole lot of movies and a whole lot of monuments. Not that stuff, the full thing. So at least they did that right. At least they included the full text, including the slaves part in the 4th commandment and in the 10th commandment. What makes this really funny, though, is that even after proposing that they add the full 10 commandments, don't leave anything out, give them the full 10 commandments, which I think was the right move. Even after that, they followed it up with an amendment that would remove the slavery. But it gets even funnier. Because remember how I mentioned that there were other traditions, other numberings to the 10 Commandments? Well, they wanted to respect that. In at least one of the amendments, they wanted to respect the fact that there are other traditions for this. So they said that there would be a Catholic version and a Jewish version next to the Protestant version of the 10 Commandments. And then it says that the school should display the accurate representation of each version of the 10 Commandments. What do you mean, accurate? You just deleted something after putting in the full text. What do you mean, accurate? But it doesn't even end there. There were other amendments proposed that make the story even funnier. As I went through these, my mind was absolutely blown when I stumbled across an amendment that would add, right next to the 10 Commandments, the 4 Noble Truths of Buddhism, which, if you don't know the 4 Noble Truths, are pretty based. But now things we're getting interesting. One of the main arguments against the display of the Decalogue in public schools has taken the form of a rhetorical question. That one being, of course, how would they feel if we put up the doctrines of other religions on the wall? But now we finally get an answer to that question. How would they feel if the Four Noble Truths were on the wall right next to the Ten Commandments? Unfortunately, the Four Noble Truths seem not to have been popular with the Christian lawmakers in Texas. Perhaps they were too extreme, but no need to worry. What about this amendment that would add the noble eightfold path? Surely stuff like right action and right mindfulness is something they can agree on. No? No, they can't? Oh, no. They don't like those things either? What a shame. But surely, the yamas of Hinduism will do. I mean, how can they disagree with stuff like nonviolence and compassion? Oh, what's that? They don't like nonviolence and compassion? I'm so surprised. Okay. One last chance for another religion to get included along with the Ten Commandments. Oh, look at that. An amendment to add the 5 pillars of Islam. This one didn't go well. Here's the thing that really gets to me. There have been plenty of Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu Americans that have helped build this country and its industries. If you want to celebrate the cultural past of America and put the Ten Commandments in schools because of that, it would logically follow that the tenets of other major faiths ought to be included too. Even if we grant that this bill is not a violation of the Establishment Clause, I think the fact that they were given a chance to be more inclusive and chose not to be, more than anything, shows that they don't want religion back in schools. They want Christianity back in schools. There is a lot of context that gets left out when you just stamp some religious doctrine on the wall with no commentary, no explanation. Firstly, this is an ancient Near Eastern treaty. It shares everything in common with how ancient Near Eastern treaties were written back in the day. Now, if you want your kids signing an ancient Near Eastern treaty, be my guest. That's actually kind of dope. But you really think that they should be doing that in schools? You know what else is pretty weird? The Sabbath commandment. Is it on Saturday or Sunday? Now, historically, for the Jews, it's always been Saturday. That seems to line up with all the biblical evidence as well. But because the Christians decided to take the Lord's Day, which was Sunday, and equate that with the Sabbath and the day of rest, that's how Christians got Sunday Sabbath. So when it says that you shouldn't do any work on the Sabbath, does that include both Saturday and Sunday, or just Sunday, or just Saturday? So you're already confusing the kids. And last time I checked, Republicans hate when the kids are confused. Furthermore, some of these laws are just for men. Like they only apply to Israelite men. We can actually take a look at the 10th commandment that says that you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, house, etc. It doesn't say anything about not coveting your neighbor's husband. That's because the implication is that this was a covenant for the Israelite men. The same thing applies to the commandment against adultery. It only applied to men because women were considered property. If you had sex with another man's wife, that would be considered adultery. If she was unmarried, it was no problem. Doesn't matter if you were married or not. Now, there is a lot more I could get into, and maybe in the future I'll do a longer video on the Ten Commandments where I can actually talk about the textual history and the historical context and the history of interpretation and all that fancy, high-minded shit. But my point is this. By putting the Ten Commandments in public schools with no additional material, and yes, the bill really says that. It says that to make sure the copy of the Ten Commandments that you have, quote, does not contain any additional content. If we do that, we are not only violating the Establishment Clause, we are also doing a disservice to the Ten Commandments and to the Bible in general. There is so much we can learn about early Israelite religion from studying the Ten Commandments and studying the Bible. But it requires context, and a lot of it. But the thing is, the people pushing this stuff don't care about context. They don't care about historical realities. They just want to indoctrinate, and this is an early step in that process. I'll end this by quoting Michael Coogan from his book, The Ten Commandments, because I think he really hits the nail on the head. In his final few pages of that book, he's actually talking about the Ten Commandments erected in 1956 that was the subject of the Van Orden v. Perry case. But I still think it applies to the Ten Commandments bills that we're seeing today. It is deeply ironic that those supporting the display of the Ten Commandments defend it by claiming that they are doing so only because of the secular, historical importance of the Decalogue. For them, clearly, the text is indisputably a sacred text. It leaves out not only the religiously unaffiliated and atheists, but Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, Muslims, and other religions that enrich American culture. Finally, I would argue that the display of the Ten Commandments is not only un-American, but contrary to the underlying values of the Bible. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. I had a wild ride learning about all those amendments and reading through them. That was kind of crazy. But hopefully you enjoyed it as well. If you did enjoy it, drop a like. If you didn't, drop a dislike. If you have a lot of complaints and concerns, drop a comment. Any kind of engagement helps with the algorithm. If you'd like to support this channel in other ways, you can join our Discord where we can all chat it up. Ruben will say hello to you. He says hello to everyone. He's a very nice guy. I promise he'll do that. He always does. And we also have a Patreon page where you can help us out in other ways. You can enter into a t-shirt giveaway every month. Got a whole bunch of stuff for you on there. I'm going to be posting on there a lot more now that I finally graduated, finally got my degrees. Still finding a graduate school, but whatever. Hopefully you enjoyed the content today, and I hope to see you soon.